It may seem weird to start my YouTube channel with a top games of 2019 list, since part of the joy in watching these lists involves comparing and contrasting the results with our expectations. If I praised a game during the year but left it off the list, you'll want to know what happened. Same with a game that I didn't like. It'd have been interesting to hear what the turning point was. Plus, a year's worth of content may explain why certain games didn't make my list. That way I could avoid questions like, where's Disco Elysium? What about Pathologic 2? Are you telling me that you didn't like Devil May Cry 5? With no major online presence and no context for these opinions, a top 5 list seems really random. Well, first off, if I had the power to make my master's program end sooner, then I would have used it already. Seriously, I love psychology, but I don't love evening classes, the homework they give, or the full-time job scheduled around them. Second, I think it's actually good to give a potential audience some of my bite-sized opinions on games, particularly the qualities that I find attractive in them. Sure, the channel I hope to have will feature longer, more didactic discussion of various media, but that doesn't mean I can't offer something accessible as an entry point. But most importantly, I like list videos. I know it's cool to make fun of them, call them arbitrary, and ruminate on how mad they make people, but I always love an end of the year list, especially the polarizing ones. You know what I wish there were more of? Dedicated non-male characters. Sure, it's cool that more games allow players to choose the protagonist they prefer, but there are comparatively few games that give you a leading woman and nothing else. Control was quite good if you have the hardware to support it. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night was a nice return to traditional Castlevania, if that's something you're into. I seem to like Wolfenstein Youngblood a lot more than most, particularly its polarizing protagonist, Jess and Soph, though I'm less happy about it serving as a padded-out teaser for a proper Wolfenstein 3. I'd have much preferred a full game with a full story. I can keep the cherry-picking up for a little longer, but this list ultimately pales in comparison to the number of games in which you're just a guy, and that's it. This lack of representation speaks to an industry-wide blind spot for the experiences of women and marginalized genders. And as games strive for higher quality narratives, these unique perspectives represent a well of untapped potential. Case in point, A Plague Tale: Innocence is not a typical medieval game full of swords, dragons, and glory in battle. Rather, it follows the story of Amicia Darun, recently orphaned teenage girl traveling through a plague-ridden, war-torn France with her youngest brother Hugo. The two terrified children fight their way through riotous villages with superstitious peasants, battlefields piled high with the corpses of men and animal alike, and ominous churches hiding great evil within them. And rats. So many rats. Its lovingly rendered hideousness sets the perfect foundation for Amicia's thrust into adulthood. Deprived of her own chance to grieve the death of her mother and father, she is now the only caretaker for Hugo, a sheltered and naive child who doesn't understand why his world suddenly became so cruel. Her frustration with this emotional labor comes to a head during tense shouting matches, the blame for which is hard to place when both parties are still just children. And as children, facing down an army of religious mercenaries with brute force is impossible. Thus, the setting allows for strong stealth action combat, showing off Amicia's quick wit, patience, and ingenuity. Her sling and the many projectiles she can craft for it facilitate a decent amount of brutal and strategic assassination.
Efficient. I like it.
Clever distractions, nasty rat-based environmental kills, and some straight-up murder go a long way toward making this teenage girl still feel like a stone-cold badass. Pun intended. I understand the possible criticisms. Not every puzzle is a winner, be they too easy or too obtuse. The strict linearity limits the options for stealth, and the actual aiming can be awkward. However, none of that detracted from the tension in the gameplay, nor did it negate the strong character writing behind the reluctant Amicia and her boyish charge. A Plague Tale: Innocence is a standout hit, and seeing smaller studios put out such powerhouse titles is always refreshing. So, Japan just dominated the AAA development space this year. I mean, take a moment to acknowledge the sheer volume of games coming out of that country. The Resident Evil 2 remake, the Monster Hunter World Icebound expansion, Devil May Cry 5, Code Vein, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, Pokemon Sword and Shield, and maybe even a few more games that made this list. That's right, keeping some surprises to myself. Among that great deluge of Japanese games is the newest outing of From Software, makers of a PS3 exclusive, 2/3 of a good game, a really rough gem, a work of uninhibited brilliance, and a do-over disguised as a threequel. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice is a Sengoku-era stealth action game that makes serious departures from the conventional Soul-style gameplay. The RPG elements have been almost entirely stripped away, the narrative is considerably more straightforward, and the combat has been streamlined to focus on precision and aggression. And like many of the most famous From Software titles, Sekiro is pretty darn tough. You're gonna get massacred over and over again. This game leaves you reeling at every step. And just when you think you have a hang of things, bam, dude pulls out his hidden lightning powers. But hey, if you manage to dodge that, then this lady will grab you and slam you into the ground. Make a wrong move, and this lady will slam you too. I'm sorry, is someone into this? I don't want a king shame. That is, if you didn't already give up after being thrown off a cliff, or shoved into a wall so the camera can't see you, or this guy. Don't get me wrong, the difficulty can be disheartening, and the temptation to give up is always there. But once you and your sword finally click, it's a rush unlike any other. Finding the right cadence to the combat results in a beautiful ballet of clanging swords, swift dodges, and delightfully satisfying counters. And I cannot stress this enough, learn your Makiri counters. The opportunity for posture damage is too great, and this game is all about rewarding players who can keep the aggression high while efficiently managing the risks. I only wish more fights could have incorporated the game's newfound verticality. Platforming has always been a nightmare in Souls, but Sekiro makes the level hopping outright fun with superb jumping and creative anchor placement. Lastly, while some found the narrative underwhelming, I thought the plight of the Ashina family served as an interesting examination of the ideological differences between Shintoism and Buddhism. It explored how our earthly desires inform the essential parts of our humanity, even as those desires turn corrupt inside of us and lead us to suffering. It showed players how immortality bred stagnation, and how the pursuit of immortality ended in degradation. One cannot truly live their life if they do not properly respect its brevity. What it lacks in lore to assemble, it makes up for with rich philosophical discussion and my own desire to learn more about the big ideas on display. Definitely not one to miss. In contrast to previous entries which had relatively focused stories, Fire Emblem Three Houses has a broad, incidental narrative about a school at the center of a massive kingdom. You can really sink into the politics at the intersection of Fodlan, the Empire, and the Alliance, or you can do what the game encourages you to do and get overly involved with your students. Sure, you may be a conduit for the power of the goddess Sothis, and thus a perfect vessel for the will of the divine Lady Rhea, but wouldn't you rather teach a bunch of happy-go-lucky warlords how to be their best selves? I guess if you want, you can fixate on Lady Rhea's alarmingly curt brutality and penchant for clandestine operations against dissident warlords, but that's not where the story really excels. Three Houses succeeds in creating a network of individual and interactive personalities. Characters like Bernadetta and Caspar broadcast the ruthless politics of noble families. The interactions between Ferdinand and Dorothy. Yes, that is how you pronounce the name Dorothy. It's not Dorothea. Like look at the name Chelsea. Would you say that is Chelsea? No, it's Dorothy. Just call her Dorothy. The interactions between Ferdinand and Dorothy are a comically polite microcosm of the class disparities on the continent. And you may not be too interested in Edelgard's imperial ambitions, but you will definitely cheer for her when she finally overcomes her insecurities. By the way, these examples should let you know that the Black Eagles are the best. This character focus informs the central mechanic, the school calendar. On a month-to-month basis, you must balance a litany of different systems and activities in order to maximize the growth and combat potential of your students. Keep their motivation high with gifts and lost items so that they can get the most out of their weekly instructions, improving the skills they need to survive in combat. Host tea parties with conversation to make them better teammates. Help them achieve their goals, or set your own goals to guide them on their way to the master classes. The time and attention spent helping these characters grow, actually grow, makes it so hard to watch them die in combat. Permadeath is bad enough in games like XCOM Enemy Unknown or Darkest Dungeon, when your investment in the individual is purely mechanical. But Petra is an actual person. She's an actual named individual with personality, unique quirks, life experience, and ambitions. Ambitions that I helped her realize. I was there when she studied hard to become a Wyvern Lord, even though being an immigrant made classes and conversation a little bit more difficult. I got to see her beat the odds, rise to every occasion, and become an indispensable member of my team. I was so terrified of losing her that I played smarter, thought longer about my decisions, and became better at the game, just so we could see each other to the end. The character arcs, teaching sessions, and strategic battles are all strong in isolation. But it's the way these disparate elements weave together that makes this game so phenomenal. Fire Emblem Three Houses earned the number 3 spot on my list by fusing raw quality with ludonarrative investment, a combination of design priorities that really sets this title apart. Get absorbed in it for yourself, and you too can learn how easy it is to ignore the atrocities of an authoritarian government by allowing yourself to settle into a comfortable routine.
Yeah.
The runner-up for Best Game of 2019 is The Outer Worlds, the strikingly autobiographical outing from Obsidian Entertainment. I mean, listen to this plot summary. A former employee for the Halcyon Corporation recently escaped confinement on the Hope, a massive company ship abandoned in space after management decided not to incur the cost of awakening its employees from stasis. They then confront the harmful consequences of unchecked capitalism on the newly colonized solar system, build a fresh identity outside of their former employment, and unearth a massive cover-up undertaken by Halcyon to disguise its numerous failures and callous disregard for human life. Write what you know, huh? And that's exactly what Obsidian did, because they were able to turn their terrible experiences with the AAA video games industry into a beautiful, highly detailed, system-rich action RPG. Seriously, this game is gorgeous. Every part of it is colorful. The settlements are awash with advertisements, billboards, and neon signage, as the gaudy "look at me" corporate marketeering creates a vibrancy in the game's many towns.
You would never ask if you knew what it's like in here.
The wilds are lusciously biodiverse, and its creatures are as radiant as they are deadly. And even the industrial areas are tinged with primary colors that pop out of the screen. The RPG systems are equally as brilliant, with stats and skills governing practical abilities and conversational variety. Knowledge of technology can reveal alternate dialogue options that offer creative quest solutions. Some clever hacking or lockpicking can lead to secret documents that give you the upper hand in a tight spot. And while many encounters with creatures and free-roaming marauders must either be avoided or ended with violence, several conflicts can be pacified with speech skills.
Sublight? I hate it when you outlaws organize. The paperwork for killing you would be the death of me.
While lasers, bullets, and explosions are certainly a draw, The Outer Worlds really shines in its writing. The game makes use of its relatively small size to get the most out of its important characters. Key figures in the world will take part in overlapping quests, many of which feed into each other to create a more cohesive sense of the world. There are only a handful of locations that get used only once, so determined The Outer Worlds is to make its setting feel like an organic society. Even the companions, as individuated as their stories may seem, can shine a light on life in the colony. Vicar Max reveals his cynicism toward the philosophical theories that govern the colony, So much so that he seeks out radical, borderline heretical texts just to find a meaning in life that corporations and consumption could not provide. Ellie's story highlights the dehumanizing effects of money and the damage people can cause by manipulating bureaucratic processes. And Parvati? Well, she just reminds us that real love is there for everyone, even without the promise of sex.
So, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna head to my cabin and happy scream into my pillow for like an hour.
This, above all else, is what made The Outer Worlds such a success. It's a reminder that RPGs are about more than just grinding meaningless tasks, raising numbers, and filling bars in the hope that they will one day yield satisfaction. They are more than just compulsory actions demanded by companies that monetize compulsive engagement. A good RPG is not a can of salt tuna, filling but ultimately lacking in sustenance. A good RPG can inspire curiosity, a desire to grow through interaction with others, and the ambition to make things better. The Outer Worlds is a good RPG. So I'll readily admit that it took me a shamefully long time to get into Yakuza 0. I tried pushing myself through the game's slow and wildly overwritten opening chapters, but I hadn't fully acclimated to the rhythm. It was only after seeing how much fun my fiancé was having with the game that I decided to give it another try. Let's just say, I'm glad she's a more patient gamer than I am, because once I came back, I couldn't leave Kamurocho or Satenbori until I was done. The writing was phenomenal. Not only were individual conversations constructed of rich prose, but every mission, from wacky side quests to the central driving narrative, helped provide some context as to life in the two Japanese cities. That interconnectivity also informed the gameplay. Hey, it's almost like that's a theme or something. I felt like I was finally paying this venerated series the respect it deserved. I was ready to show my enthusiasm for their newest game, Judgment, when all of a sudden the world went silent on it. Like, come on! Ryuga Gotoku put out a powerhouse spiritual successor to their Yakuza series, and it was so thoroughly dismissed by the gaming public. This isn't entirely true. Jim Sterling covered the game in his Jimpressions series, and a few YouTubers and journalists brought the game up in their year-end retrospectives. But Judgment really should have received the praise befitting one of the best games in the studio's library. The writing is incredible, that's mostly a given. But Judgment shines in its concision. The studio has perfected a density of speech necessary to keep conversations lively while also allowing them to drip with tension. The clever interactions highlight how strong the characters are, showing off the writing team's versatility when it comes to crime narratives. While many were worried that Judgment would be an overly mundane facsimile of its predecessor, I can assure you that this fear is not especially warranted. Firstly, the murder mystery is sprawling and twisted with character-centric conflicts that add dimensions to what could have been a straightforward crime drama. The murder itself is almost secondary to the motivations and machinations of those involved, reaching back into larger sociological issues facing modern Japan. Land insecurity, the political influence of crime families, corruption, and larger examinations of justice. And for anyone who isn't into that weighty philosophical stuff, Judgment still lets you play Puyo Puyo in the arcade, punch people in the street, and chase down dudes named Ass Ketchum and the Panty Professor. Preferably while drunk. While each of these side activities are entertaining in their own right, the real treasure is in how all parts of Judgment are interconnected. Progress in one domain feeds into advancement in another. Little stories with one-off characters help to color in the lines of larger concepts. They also give you the money and skill points necessary to improve your abilities and advance other quests. Yet even with this wealth of content, the love is evident in the little details. The side characters you encounter have their own quirks, creating humorous and awkward situations in the world. The central characters are consistently endearing and often surprisingly well-rounded. I particularly love the mission involving Sayori, the Daria-like attorney who summons unexpected amounts of charisma to infiltrate a host club. But the details that stunned me most, however, were in the combat. While still cartoonish in nature, the brutality of Yagami's fighting style is more evident by the damage he causes. Flying bodies crash against objects in the environment, sometimes thrown through windows of nearby businesses. The attacks and EX actions are so wonderfully interactive with the environment, leading to a whole host of comedic and surreal encounters.
I'll crush you! Okay, that just happened.
And if you look closely, really focus in on your environment, you can see blood splattering on nearby objects, including cars and shoes. These subtle, near imperceptible effects just add so much character to what could have otherwise been just a standard brawler. Judgment's Kamurocho offers players a world with both breadth and depth, containing such varied yet consistently impactful content. Again, this game was so easily overlooked upon its release to the States, and that really is a great shame. Ryoga Gotoku even made lockpicking minigames and tailing missions fun by injecting them with the same emphatic energy that this game puts toward anything else. It's sprawling, lovingly crafted, and the best game I've played all year. But hey, if my enthusiastic endorsement of Judgment still hasn't interested you, then consider this. Every time you're taken into detective mode to look for clues, you can find a cat. Yeah, a cat. Just sitting in the crime scene. No joke, you can spend a good 5 minutes ignoring the mission at hand just to look in the background for cats. Yeah, just cats. Literally, what more could you want from a game? That's it. That's all you need. Stop asking for more, this game's already perfect! Narrowing down the list this year was really tough. A lot of hard decisions had to be made. A lot of cuts came with serious reservations, and the temptation to let my honorable mentions list run wild was too great. I was constantly worried about ignoring a good game that deserves celebration, unable to curtail the flow of anxiety telling me that I should play more games. Should I have made more of an effort to play indie hits like Sayonara Wild Hearts or Baba Is You? Are people going to be mad at me because I thought Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was just kinda mediocre? When am I going to finally admit to myself that I just don't like Metroidvania games no matter how good I can begrudgingly acknowledge that they are? And then again, you know it's a good year when all you can think about are the good games you haven't played yet. For as much as American capitalism loves to take anything with a soul and repackage it as generic featureless slop, 2019 shouldn't be defined by the fact that Ubisoft released 2 Tom Clancy games in the same year. Yeah, that's right, you remember correctly. Both The Division 2 and Ghost Recon Breakpoint came out this year, and I would be hard-pressed to meaningfully differentiate them, save for the fact that I'm sure some people actually wanted a Division sequel. No, 2019 should be a year that vindicated the single-player game, rewarded artistic expression over monetized engagement, and gave a spotlight to unconventional titles from smaller studios. A year that started with the crushing failure of Anthem, ended with a catalog of such variety and vigor. And these 5 games were a strong exclamation point to end on. I look forward to 2020, with all the city chasing, demon slaying, and sword slashing action coming our way. What were your favorite games of 2019? Did they match up with mine? Or is your top 5 radically different? Are you enthralled by the promise of 2020, or cautious of the hype and potential for disappointment? Leave a comment and let me know. Best of the year discussions are always a treat, and I love reading about how my tastes compare to everyone else. Thanks for watching, and cheers to a new decade of gaming, and, if any luck is on my side, the start of a new YouTube channel.
Shall I congratulate myself, or would you like to do the honors?